All right, Zach, what's the best camera for beginners?
The best camera for beginners is going to be your iPhone. The reason being is you're familiar with the interface already, so you don't have to learn how to use it, and you can focus on composition and focus on the actual filmmaking techniques because it's a familiar device that's also high quality enough to actually use for legitimate productions.
Right on.
Do you need film school to be a filmmaker?
Obviously, you don't. I took media production classes, which is not film school. We had an actual film program that I was not in, and I turned out just fine. I think film school is valuable for the connections it allows you to make. I think it's a very great thing. If you can do it, go ahead and do it. I think you'll enjoy it. But if you don't enjoy it, it's not your one ticket to being a filmmaker. How do you find people to collaborate with?
I'm actually really bad about this, and the solution I've had to this problem is just don't collaborate with anyone except you. And everything I do on my own is just by myself. I'm a big fan of self-filming and stuff, so I can't really answer that. I would just say lean into your network as much as possible, friends and family.
Make your friends do things.
Yes, maybe make a post on social media, friends of friends. Don't assume that you're not going to find anyone or that someone's answer to something is going to be no. I think you'll be surprised if you just ask for help. So what's the easiest type of film to make with no budget?
We've had an episode about that, so I'll point viewers to that. I do think that a very gritty detective sort of film, or perhaps an interpersonal drama, mumblecore, as you will, those are definitely up there. But really, you can do anything. We shot an entire club scene for our film, just on a rooftop at your apartment at the time. It's not that hard. So you can, as long as you're willing to kind of flex those creative muscles, you can fake your way through a lot of production value. I know how I do it, but how do you write a short film script?
Find budget ways and budget things that you have access to, and try and write a script around that. So for example, if I know I have access to a certain house, try to conceptualize what type of story could take place there. And then from there, as far as the specifics of the elements of the plot and what you want it to be about, narratively and thematically, just pull inspiration from whatever's got you inspired recently. Whether it's a recent philosophy book you read, or a recent film that you watched, or a bad horror film that you watched that you think you could have done better. Pull on that inspiration, try to write something doable around what you have access to. What's one mistake every first-time filmmaker makes?
There's so many mistakes. I mean, you could literally say hey, f-stop, hey, you can go down all the technical mistakes. I think a big one is both trying to imitate someone else's style. For me, it was I always wanted to look like a Wes Anderson film looked, or various indie films that I watched looked. But also, I would say there's a danger in trying to lean too hard and finding your own style rather than just letting it happen to you. How do you stay motivated when a project gets tough? And I know we've been in projects where they've gotten tough.
What? No way. I would say focus on the things that you love about filmmaking. Maybe don't focus on the problems and what's tough about it in that moment. Just try to remember why do you love this thing in the first place, and just focus on that. Be positive and punch your writer producer. What's the fastest way to learn how to edit?
Honestly, as somebody that's run through several editing programs, I found that the fastest way has been to just take in my media production programs at school, which I will always be forever thankful to my professors for making me do this. They would just have us shoot a short little kind of garbage short. It has the same script. You just have two people do dialogue in front of a camera or whatever. And then they sit you in the studio. You do the Premiere Pro tutorial, and then they're all right, here's your footage, do something with it. And I think having hey, I want to do this, I'm going to either figure it out or ask somebody or look it up on YouTube and just get up to your elbows in it is really the easiest way, at least for me, to edit something. It works that way with sound, with video, arguably with text too, but that's another conversation. Should you buy or rent your gear? I'm not the gear guy. You're the gear guy. Tell me.
If you asked me this question 50 years ago, I would have said rent
50?
gear. Yes, 50 years ago, I would have said rent your gear. But considering that filmmaking equipment is so cheap and so high quality. I think it's just better to buy something and have access to it 24/7 instead of having to go through the rental house. In a day and age where it's difficult to tell an iPhone apart from an Arri camera, and I know this is true because I've seen the comparisons, I just think it's more compelling to buy gear right now, almost always.
Okay.
How do you make a no-budget film look professional?
I've said this before, I'll say it again, good sound. People will forgive so much visually if you have good sound, but I feel like outside of color grade and all of that, really going for a few statement pieces with production value, be it like prop or clothing or just the way that you dress your actors, the way that you set everything up in a scene with set dressing, etc., really bumps up the production value and makes it look professional. Zach, you went above and beyond arranging the wires for the setup in one of our shots, just so like the leading lines were just right, and it really elevated the scene in ways that I did not expect. Well, welcome to Your Next Film, a podcast by creatives for creatives. I'm your host, Mateo Guthrie.
And I'm your host, Zachary Koch, and today we're going over what?
Oh, it just did the, I pointed this way and it did the thumbs down.
You got to turn reactions off.
I need to. I'm your host, Mateo Guthrie.
And I'm your host, Zachary Koch, and today we're answering 100 of the most common filmmaking questions. But before we get into that, what inspired you this week, Mateo?
Really, again, I'm on the output phase, and I've been working on some short videos and some little clips that I hope you, the audience, will be able to see soon. But it's really gotten the creative juices running, not just having seen something and been like, oh, that's a great piece of media, a great piece of art, I want to make my own art, but actually like going out there and doing it really gets me wanting to make more.
Yeah, you've put the fuel in the tank and now you're driving 100 miles an hour in your GTI.
Exactly.
Wouldn't know anything about it.
How's the GTI?
It's fantastic. I did notice there's like a bulge on one of the tires. So I probably need to replace that.
I hate those. Probably hit a freaking pothole.
Pothole, yeah.
Yeah. What inspired you, Zach?
Myself, because I'm so inspirational. I look in the mirror and I say, dang, I aspire to be as cool as him. And then I'm not. And then it's awkward.
All right. So, next question. Let's just jump right into it. How long should a short film be?
A short film should be less than 40 minutes long. Between
That's
1
just
minute,
the definition of a short film.
A short film should be as long as your story is. As long as it's under 40 minutes, it can be as long as it needs to be. Some stories only take 30 seconds to play out. Some stories take 30 minutes to play out. Regardless, don't force yourself into a specific runtime. I feel like I used to do that a lot where I was like, oh, this is a 15-minute film. I'm going to make a 15-minute film. Or this is an 8-minute film. This feels like an 8-minute. No, forget all that. Just start filming. Like when your narrative comes to a logical conclusion while you're scripting it, however many pages long that is, that's probably how long your story's going to be. I don't think a short film should be any particular length. What makes a script stand out?
That's such a hard one because there are so many things that can make a script stand out. I think for me, it's certain scripts have that spark. And I'm just talking about like my own script. I'm not judging other people's scripts. But like out of my own scripts, there'll be some that just have that spark of like passion, something about it. It's scrappy sometimes it's refined, but it's always like I have the drive behind it. And I think that's what makes me want to make those scripts over other scripts that I've written. How do you write compelling dialogue?
The way I write compelling dialogue is probably different from how you write it. I like to write dialogue that feels as natural as possible. I don't want my dialogue to do a lot of narrative heavy lifting. I want it to just kind of exist and just be there and be in the moment.
Solid.
What is the best way to overcome writer's block?
Honestly, and again, we have a whole episode where I talk about this for the most part because I was experiencing pretty severe writer's block on Hypnagogia when we were writing it. What I found, there's two things that have really worked for me. First of all, being the Pixar, well, what couldn't happen question. So I'm like, yeah, I don't know what to do next. I don't like this isn't working, and it's like, well, what shouldn't happen? What isn't able to happen? What are we ruling out? And then from that, I'd be like, oh yeah, like it would get me thinking about the framework of it. That's not a tip that I came up with. That's from the Pixar writers, and therefore they're much smarter than I am. But personally, also just getting out there and grinding it out and just putting down 10 pages, even if those 10 pages are bad, putting down 1 page, putting down half a page even, it will get me moving, and I can always go back and edit the bad stuff, but I can't edit what hasn't been written. And that pulls me through that a lot. How important is theme in a film?
I would say theme is almost more important than plot, because plot is cool. Plot is like the thing that's moving things along, but the theme is why you're here for the plot. And without a why in your film, I just feel like it lacks a lot of soul. Like, for example, a particular horror film that I watched last night that had a lot of plot and no theme, and it just felt like a complete waste of time. So I would say theming is extremely important.
Inglorious Bastards felt that way for me.
What's one storytelling trope that you love?
Oh, that's a hard one. I love so many tropes. Honestly, um, when done right, the sort of old man revenge movie that we've seen for the past 5 years, since actually 10 years, since John Wick.
Since Rambo.
Yeah, since Rambo, but like specifically since John Wick was kind of a guy who's kind of older and down and out, and then he just kind of does his whole like killing his way through things. Mandy does it best, I feel. And he's not even that old in Mandy, but I'm like, man, yeah, that rules. And I know it's trite at this point, and it's been done so many times, but it never gets old for me. How do you structure a feature length film? Because we just did that, so now you can actually structure it.
The most important thing for me is that all is lost moment. That's usually the bridge between act 2 and 3. And I feel like establishing stakes and then having like the worst case scenario actually play out is a really compelling thing to have in a movie. And then seeing the character kind of work their way up from that all is lost moment just really gives the film a lot of momentum. So as far as like holistically structuring a film, I try to build it around that all is lost moment. Should you outline your script or just start writing?
Outline, 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 outline. You have to outline. Not that you can't just start writing it. You have sort of the fluid idea of a story in your head. That's worked for me before, but an outline always helps set up all the little moments. You get in a nice little framework. You know sort of where you need to be. At least have a roadmap. I've done it on the back of my freaking electric bill, and it has worked great for me. And it was this God Love Robots, and it just worked. Having that framework really lets me, even just when orienting like plot, lets me set things where they need to be in ways that make sense. What's more important, plot or character?
Character, by far. I think and this is just my opinion. I'd love to pick your brain about this afterwards, like probably when we're done recording. But I think that character precedes plot. So the plot is whatever the characters would like naturally do given kind of the confines that you've placed them in as a character. And I think that if you can build a strong character, I think the plot just kind of naturally flows from that. That's just kind of my opinion. If I had to pick one or the other, I'd rather have strong characters than a really strong plot.
All right.
He's dying to say something.
Yeah, no, I'm like vibrating in my seat. I have to talk about this.
Give your like 10-second response.
My 10-second response is, I feel that it depends. Often I'll find that there are places with characters that are very pastiche and 2D, but they work because they serve a plot that needs that.
How do you know when your script is ready?
Your script is never ready. You can always make it better. I do believe that you'll probably know when your script is ready when you get like your second round of feedback or third round of feedback. You know, you've put it together more or less. And then you start getting kind of repetitive feedback from people. And you've either addressed or ignored those comments. But when you stop getting like a lot of new feedback from new readers, and you can kind of go, okay, if I do anything else to this script, it needs to be very drastic. And you can kind of know that it's like ready there.
Well, that concludes the writing and storytelling portion of the questions. Now we're going to jump into the production phases, starting with pre-production.
This is a big one. How do you budget for a film?
I don't think you should worry about budget too much. I think the budget is just whatever you can afford to spend. Like whatever money's left over after the paycheck, if you have a little bit in savings, just spend that, tiny bit of money.
Bet the farm.
Yeah, no, don't do that. You don't have to anymore. You can make a movie for $100 or $200. We made our first feature film for something like $400. If you cut out all the equipment and things that we already had, you don't need a lot of money, and arguably you don't need any money to start making a movie as long as you have a phone.
An iPhone and a light bulb.
That is address how you budget, but I think it's a good answer. I'm gonna leave it in.
The how is I don't. It just happens.
What's the most overlooked part of pre-production?
Depending what camp you fall into, script outlines are often pretty overlooked. I think a big part that's overlooked, and this applies more to indie or even like no budget films where if you're getting paid, it's not a lot. On a big film set, like, oh yeah, these people are getting paid, therefore they like have a lot of set expectations for like what their role in the project is. But I think sitting down and really having a conversation with your key stakeholders in the project is very helpful with getting like everybody squared away on the ethos and what this is going to require from the jump. Because otherwise it's like, you get to about midway through the film, somebody's pissed off at you because you're not doing something that you said you wouldn't do. And they're like, why aren't you doing the thing? It's like, well, I said I wouldn't do it like at the jump, a while ago. And they're like, well, I thought you were going to do this. And it's like, if you'd sat down and actually like hashed out expectations, and like, how much time you're willing to invest and how much effort, all of that, it really helps smooth things down the line where nobody gets their feelings hurt because they were operating under a different set of presuppositions. How do you find great locations for cheap? Because I remember getting kicked off locations with you, so I'm very, very interested in.
But it was a great location and it was cheap. I would say one way to find, like, focusing on the find, how do you find them? Just drive around. If you have a car, it's really easy to find like older abandoned places. Like there's just lots of open areas, fields that aren't necessarily private property, old towns that are more or less abandoned.
Public
there's just
spaces.
You got to go out and find them. Put in the effort. Take a different walking path to work. Drive around. Take the bus to a random town that you've never been to before. Just go see a new location with fresh eyes and just see what you can find. Mateo, what is the best way to cast actors?
Buy your friend's pizza. In seriousness, like, I love my friends. Not all of them are necessarily grade A actors. And so I've found the best way has been to just send out an email. Hey, making a film. Here's the roles. Do like a normal casting call to, 3 or 4 of your local casting agencies. And just, set the expectations. Hey, this is free. I'm not making money off this. Neither will you. I'm sorry. But it really allows people who want to collaborate artistically, who already have, agents out there that are looking for this kind of stuff for them. They get something for their reel. They get to show off how powerfully they can like emote as they're crying on the ground and dying of cat allergies or whatever. Like being able to push like your network out to just a bunch of people who you don't necessarily know but are just as passionate about filmmaking as you are is really valuable. How do you make a shot list?
The best way to make a shot list, assuming you already have a script, is to go line by line through the script and look for actions. And usually every action line is its own shot. So a lot of the times the storytelling, as far as the sequencing goes, because that's largely what filmmaking is, it's sequencing shots, and each shot is kind of its own sentence, if you will. We'll get into that. We keep saying we're going to talk about film language. We need to talk about that soon.
Yeah, we do.
Usually each action line is its own sentence, if you will. So I would just make a list of all of those and figure out, like, is this shot focusing on a specific detail or is it more contextual, like setting the scene? That would determine the shot size. But the best way to make a shot list is literally just go line by line. What's the one piece of gear every set needs?
Personally, it's always been like a binder. I found like a proper binder where I can take notes and reshuffle all of my papers because I'm often doing a bit of script super work. That's invaluable. I think proper C stand is incredibly valuable.
Hmm.
And I know there's times where you don't need a C stand. We've run sets where the only piece of equipment is a mic boom and the camera, and everything else is set up on the camera, even the light and a monitor. So you can go as minimal as you need, but a C stand will always be useful for one thing or another. You're always going to need a light or a reflector or something, a bounce,
Hmm.
a shade. Even we've set up cameras on C stands and like run them up so we can get a good overhead shot, and it looks great.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say the C stand is invaluable, and you'll never regret having one on set.
I like your answer. It makes me happy.
How do you plan a shooting schedule?
So the way that I plan a shooting schedule is I get a list of everyone that's involved with the project, every crew member, every actor, and I set a time frame like I want to shoot this film within these few weeks or within this month or just throughout the summer, and I make a list of all the people involved. I make a list of their availability. So of course I'll ask them what their availability is. Some people might only be available weekends. Some people might be available only on Tuesdays. You just need to get all that information on paper. And once you see that, you will then try and schedule your scenes around that. So for example, if there's a scene that you're shooting with two actors, well, look at the overlapping days on the schedule that they're both available, and that's when you schedule those scenes. Likely for indie films, you have to film the scenes out of order because you are asking favors of people and you have to work around their schedules, and that doesn't lend itself to a chronological shoot schedule.
Do it when you can.
Yeah, do what you can. Mateo, what's the trick to getting good permits?
Don't. No, for a large production, reaching out to your local film office is incredibly helpful. Most large cities have an office where just kind of dedicated to film and propagating that, especially as Hollywood seems to be declining and everywhere else in the country seems to be sort of eating that up, and they have film incentives, all sorts of stuff like that for budget. So if you have the money, go ahead and do that. But honestly, guerrilla or even something more like just like, well, this is my house and therefore I can shoot there because I don't live in California and I can just shoot in my own house without getting my door kicked down. That sort of stuff is where any young filmmaker really needs to be focusing. If you're doing some sort of car chase, you should probably get a permit, and then insurance, and then all this stuff. But I don't have the budget for that. My Nova doesn't even run well enough for like a low speed pursuit, much less a high speed pursuit. So for within the budget that our demographics are working with, you just don't really need them. That does mean if you get told to move or told to buzz off, you have to, but that is the risk we take. How do you manage crew on a small set? Because we have very different crew ideals, shall we say?
Yeah, I don't know if my answer has to do more with that. I would say as far as like managing them goes and kind of being the point person for everyone that they're looking to know what to do next. I would say don't be afraid to be a little bit bossy, even if you're not a bossy person, even if you're worried about coming across a certain way. You're expected to be somewhat bossy and tell people what to do on set. There's sort of an expectation for that. So don't be afraid to delegate tasks. The best way to do that, I would say, is to identify whatever the immediate needs are. Have one person own that task. Say, I want you to do this. And then everyone else, just sit down, stay out of the way. One of my favorite sayings with regards to filmmaking is hurry up and wait. So do whatever task you need to do immediately and then wait for the next thing. It's actually better that I ask you to do things than for you to continuously ask me what you can do next. It's really annoying. Mateo, what's a good backup plan for when things go wrong?
Things can go wrong in so many ways. You're coordinating basically a big ballet of people doing a bunch of stuff all at once, and it all has to sort of come together for it to like actually produce anything worth watching. We've had days where we'll show up on set and it just completely bombs. We can't use anything. Sometimes we don't even get anything because it's such a waste of time. And at that, I just went and got sad in a Starbucks. But we've had times where actors have had to drop. Actors went on vacation without telling us, and then when we scheduled them, they're like, "Oh, sorry, I know I told you I could do that, but I can't." Regardless, it's always good to have the next setup in mind, to have a plan B. Um, oh, our prop guns, because of the way they were made safe, can't do more than one shot with a blank. Um, well, we'll just make sure to cut. We'll get different angles, and we'll just sort of have to string those together. Um, or like would stagger actors shooting the gun, so it's never like all at once. Um, we've had times where a location doesn't work out because we got kicked out, and we had alternates that we went and drove to, set up there, got the shot, and it was, we lost time on the set, but we made it up later on. So it's always good to have like contingency plans in place, but also just the ability to be flexible.
So this next batch of questions is all about cinematography, starting with,
what's the best lens for indie filmmaking?
The best lens for indie filmmaking is the main camera on the iPhone 16 Pro. No, but if you're working with an interchangeable lens camera, the real answer is there is no best lens. But, if you're looking for advice, I would say maybe get a really decent Nifty 50. If you don't know what a Nifty 50 is, it's a 50 millimeter prime lens. And they're usually really fast lenses. And like we talked about in last week's episode, they happen to be very versatile focal lengths. So the best lens for indie filmmaking, something like a 50 millimeter, and they're usually really cheap too. Like a Nifty 50 from Canon, it's about $100. Mateo, how do you light a scene on a budget?
So, if you ask, if you go on a Wes Anderson's set, they've used like a lamp with a pillowcase over it before. For I believe it was Hotel Chevalier was there like a short that they had with Natalie Portman and Jason Schwartzman. If you ask Zach, he's got these nifty little LED credit card lights. I'm a big proponent of golden hour. Just set them in golden hour. It's some of our best work has been no lights whatsoever. It's just nice outside.
Mm-hmm.
Afternoon on a summer day, everybody's sweating their butts off, but it does not matter because it's golden hour. It's legitimately the lowest budget and some of the best looking lighting you'll ever have. What's the easiest way to get cinematic shots?
Light your scene even if you don't have lights. So what that means is, for example, if you shoot during golden hour, the whole point of golden hour, what makes it so great is the light is lower in the sky. And so it's easier to control where the light is falling by just repositioning your actors. So whether you're filming outside, trying to position your actors in a way to where you're filming on the dark side of their face, it's called a far side key. It's a great way to create depth because what you're doing is you're creating layers of light and shadow. So I would just always think about light placement. Where's the light coming from and what side of the subject is your camera on? And then I also just highly recommend having a backlight, something to, and I say this as I don't have a backlight. I'm still working on my setup here, but always having a backlight, it creates visual separation from your subject or from the background to your subject. And just don't neglect lighting. Should you shoot handheld or on a tripod? And there's only one correct answer here, but I give it to you.
I prefer sticks. I've done a lot of handheld. Everything with an iPhone I've done is handheld because I don't have one of those nifty tripod stands yet that you just set the iPhone on. But it's tripod on sticks or even just on a counter is so much better than handheld. It feels so much more stable. It feels so much more intentional. And I love handheld, and there's a place for handheld, but my preference is always to be able to set it, forget it, do the scene. Or if I need a whip pan, it's so much easier to just get like a smooth whip. I'm betraying my Wes Anderson worship there again. But a smooth whip with just like fluid head, snap it back and forth versus the shake of turning. It's just not as good on handheld, in my opinion. There's places for both, but I will always prefer a tripod. What's the key to great composition? And we had an episode about this.
Yeah, we did. There's a lot to talk about with regards to composition, but I would say maybe focus on visual weight. The darker things in the frame have more visual weight than the lighter ones, and what is the ratio between those things? What you're trying to do is achieve balance. Think about balance. What's in the frame? Is there too much visual weight on one side versus the other? Do we need to balance that out, or is it okay? Just think about balance. Mateo, how important is color grading?
So important. This is why we do everything in black and white, actually, which you still need to work on the grade for black and white. I've seen the black and white that Zach's raw footage had, and then I've seen the black and white that the end of the project will have, and he does so much to it to process it, and it makes it look so much better. But especially with digital cameras, you don't just have the film that has like a natural like inclination towards certain colors because it's film. Again, if you're on a new iPhone, you're shooting in RAW, you're shooting ProRes, you're doing all these things. It's very, very like muted, very kind of bleh until you grade it, and then suddenly it looks amazing. And that's all because of the color grade. I think a lot of people tend to think of color grade just like the Instagram filters in 2014, where yeah, I'm just gonna slap this on top of that and like, ooh, now it looks different. But there's so much more to it, and you shouldn't be like, oh well, I just want to shoot it without all of that like artificiality. Um, don't fall for that. Color grade is so important. It really can make or break a film, and it's why whenever we have projects that we're not able to mess with the colors of costumes, etc., um, we make sure to at least get the color grade. What's the trick to shooting at night?
The trick to shooting videos at night is even though the scene's supposed to be dark, you still have to light it. So what you're often going to do is you're going to light the scene to be brighter than it will ultimately be in post. And the reason you want to do that is because you don't want your footage to look really grainy. Sometimes when you're boosting your ISO or just shooting in the dark in general and there's not a lot of detail, there's not a lot of light, you get a really grainy image. And to combat that, you want to light your scene bright and then bring down the exposure in post. That's one trick. The second trick is be okay with the blacks in your frame being black. So don't try to lift your shadows too much. If you're filming at night and it seems logical that this area of the frame would fall off to complete pitch black, that's okay. Lean into that. But also don't neglect lighting. There's always a source of light and it's coming from somewhere. Don't just go into the woods at night in the dark and just think it's going to look good as a night scene. You still have to place a light there, which is what we did when we shot in the woods for
And it looks
Hypnagogia.
great.
There was still a light source. Now, it was a little surreal because it's like, where's that light source coming from? But, you know, if you're a fan of like Evil Dead, doesn't matter. Just put a light anywhere. You could light with your phone. You could light with a lamp, a street light, something like that. But just you still have to have a source of light even if you're filming at night and it's supposed to be dark. Mateo, how do you get smooth camera movement without a gimbal?
I'm not the one to ask for this, but historically, a skateboard.
Ah,
It's basically a dolly shot, but I'm just on a skateboard. Of course, when you hit a piece of gravel and you bite it, you are holding a camera, so keep that in mind. But it's worked for me. What's the difference between prime and zoom lenses?
I'm glad you asked. Every single lens has a field of view. So a field of view is how much you can see at any given time. A zoom lens has multiple fields of view. Prime lens only has one, so you're stuck to that one field of view. It's just a 50 millimeter, which is a certain angle. It could be 24, that's just one angle. But a zoom lens has multiple, so you can kind of widen it, hone it in. It just has multiple focal lengths. And a focal length is a measurement of the field of view. And that's all. Mateo, how do you make a scene visually interesting?
All right. So there's a lot of ways of doing. Every question starts with, well, there's a lot of ways of doing this. You can choose many. My personal favorite is to give everybody a thing to do. If you notice in the Avengers films, I know normally I poo-poo on Marvel, but in the first Avengers movie, Robert Downey Jr., and this is a thing that he planted snacks around the set because he was always hungry and he never got the snacks he wanted on set, so he just planted them in there and would pull them out and start eating them. But for a lot of these kind of dry dialogue scenes where it's just people being annoying at each other because it's a Marvel movie, he's like eating out of a bag or doing something with his hands, or somebody's tinkering over here when they shouldn't be. And through all of that, it makes whatever's happening with the characters more interesting because there's something also visually happening, sometimes mirroring the conflict that's going on. Sometimes it's just like something that they're doing that might give a bit of a character insight.
Hmm.
Either way, you have something that is not just the dialogue or just the plot happening that makes that scene visually interesting.
Hmm.
I've had people work on cars. That's one of my favorites actually. Just like lean into the engine bay, talk about whatever while you just tinker, which has just sometimes just been people banging on the exhaust manifold.
All right, so this next batch of questions is all about sound and music.
Zach, how important is sound in a film? You know my opinion. I need yours.
Frustratingly, extremely important. I think Spielberg said that sound is responsible for 70% of a movie's quality. And that's really frustrating because I love cinematography and I like the visuals. And it can be really easy to neglect sound as sort of a visual artist, but sound is crucial. Get your mic close, have a mic for dialogue, make sure to mix your ambient sound, pan audio when it's appropriate. Like all of that is going to immerse your audience into the film frustratingly more than having like interesting visuals sometimes. I hate it. It's annoying. Mateo, what's the best budget mic for filmmaking?
This is a rough one because I buy weird mics that were not made in this century, or frankly haven't been made for almost a century. But I would say the one you have, like the little Rode influencer mics, the little wireless, the Rode wireless, very nice actually. I believe Honeywell makes some equivalents that are less hyped than the Rode, but are of equal or greater quality. A good, just like go down to your local pawn shop or wherever you can find used sound equipment and get a solid shotgun mic.
Hmm.
It's not as versatile as the Lav, but I love a good shotgun mic. Zach, how do you avoid bad audio on set?
Two things. One, focus on your signal to noise ratio. So make sure that the thing that you're recording, the thing that you want to hear, is at least significantly louder than everything else. So as long as that ratio is okay, even if you have background noise, you can kind of process your audio to kind of get around that. And if you're a Final Cut Pro editor, the voice isolation little checkbox that you can click in the inspector window it just solves all of your audio problems. It's incredible. You just literally click that and your dialogue sounds great, and all the ambient noise happening around that you didn't want to record, it's just gone. It's magic. It's really great. So good mic placement first and foremost. Second of all, edit in Final Cut Pro and use that voice isolation button because it's awesome. It's really sick. Mateo, should you hire a composer or use stock music for your
You know
movies?
my answer, which is neither. Be your own composer. Obviously, for our projects, we don't really have the money to hire a composer. We do have people come on and work on the score with us. But honestly, just like making your own soundtrack is so much more personal than just, oh, yeah, let me find like some orchestral track that is like some stock music asset that's been used a million times before. Having something that can ebb and flow with your specific project is so much better. Do it. I did it. It was honestly a lot of fun. And I don't even have that sort of classical composition training. Just a couple years on piano and then choir.
You just got to noodle around a little bit. You'll find some cool sounds.
Yeah, do a soundscape, something very minimal, and it'll all come together for you.
It can literally just be one note. It's
Yeah,
fantastic. You guys
get
need
an
to be doing this.
arpeggiator and it'll go up and down, and you're fine. How do you sync sound in post?
So it depends on your audio workflow. So my preference is to have my audio just synced in camera, so it's attached to the video clips. That's something that's really easy to do if you're using like those Rode wireless mics that we talked about earlier. But if you're not and you're recording your audio separately from your video, just make sure to label it. So whether you're on set and you're saying you have to have scene and take numbers, otherwise you're not going to know what audio corresponds with what video. So do that pre-work of slating every single shot so that you at least know what audio is associated with what video clip. And then from there, in Final Cut Pro and in Premiere, and I'm sure DaVinci Resolve does as well, if you know which video and audio clip go together, you just select both of those in the browser window, right click, and there's usually like a sync button, and it just syncs it for you. The other way to do it is the manual way. Just put all of your video and audio clips into a timeline, make sure that they line up, and then look for the clap sound. And if you don't have a clap sound, because you don't always need it, just look for the first syllable. It's usually not that hard to line up because the waveforms are very similar. So I can just kind of sync audio just by looking at it and not even like listening to it. It's usually pretty easy. But yeah, definitely label your shots, slate them, and then name the files what the slate, what's set on the slate, whether it's scene and take, whatever. What's the secret to good sound design?
Honestly, there's a lot that can be said there. There's a lot I'm not great at because I tend to be on the front end of sound, not on the back end of sound. I do think you should make your dialogue comprehensible. Um, I so many movies I'm like, what are they saying? I need the subtitles on. I just can't understand this under the score, and it's not just like, oh well, this is an emotional scene. There's lots of stuff and lots of like music swelling in the background and the dialogue doesn't really matter. I'm talking like pivotal points where you need to understand the dialogue to get what the scene's about, and they've just got it mixed really weird. Just bring that dialogue to the front, like Zach was saying, center it or pan it. It doesn't, just as long as I can actually understand what's being said.
Hmm.
And it's not the actor's fault because it's just mixed weird.
Hmm.
And I think being able to really bring the dialogue to the forefront and make sure it's understandable is the most important thing. How do you get clean dialogue in noisy locations?
Okay, so obviously mic placement, getting your microphone as close to your subject as possible. I will point out that there's some types of noise that are acceptable. There's some types of noise that are unacceptable. So for example, if you're in a crowded location and there's other voices competing for your actor's voice, that's going to be really hard to eliminate in post. But if all you're dealing with is a noisy air conditioning unit or just like the hum in the background of like a highway, those kind of consistent tones are really easy to isolate. So you just do your post processing. I think it's called the noise print. Get a noise print, and then you can isolate that frequency. Something that's really easy to do in Audition. Or if you're using Final Cut Pro, hit that voice isolation button, baby. It's amazing. Try it. It'll
You're
change your
selling
life.
me more and more on Final Cut Pro.
I'm surprised you don't have it already. It's incredible. Should you use a boom mic or a lav mic?
So, we used labs for the entirety of the feature, and the sound was pretty darn good. I've had labs that suck, and I understand that that's because they were just bad labs. I believe the first film we worked on together had labs that were just not working.
Mm.
Labs have a lot of uses, but honestly, I prefer the boom mic. There's something about being able to just point at somebody's head, hang it high. Sometimes you can run it right into the camera. I just prefer the boom mic. That's a workflow thing for me. If you give me a neutral scene in which I could use either, I will always pick the boom mic.
Gosh, there's so much to say about that. We should do a whole episode about sound.
We should. What's a good royalty-free music site? You know my opinion on composing music, but whenever you do need the royalty-free.
This is a great opportunity to put my affiliate link in the description for... No, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to do that. There's a lot of great royalty-free music sites. The one I'm using right now is Audio, but I've used Soundstripe in the past. Soundstripe has a good selection. Those are great options if you're willing to pay for royalty-free music. Usually their subscription costs are really low. It's like $100 a year for unlimited music, and you have the rights and the license for it. My favorite, though, is actually free. It's called the Free Music Archive. So you have to look at the specific usage rights for the track that you're wanting to download, but you get just, I would say, more scrappy music on that website. It's less produced, and I find that it's easy for me to find music that matches the production value of my project. So go to Free Music Archive. It's free. It's in the title. It's literally free. And support some cool artists on there. How do you make your film soundtrack stand out?
So, honestly, just being able to ebb and flow it with what's the action on screen is the best. Just because they're like, oh dang, this is really thematically appropriate music that works. What I like to do is for the horror and thriller aspects of the feature, I've been really focusing on taking interesting sounds and layering them, maybe like very low, but maybe like 3 layers deep, where somebody's subbrain will recognize something, but I have signal processed it so hard that they really can't recognize it. I love making really interesting sounds for a soundscape that sit right below consciousness, just enough that you feel something in the song that you recognize without quite understanding why you recognize it.
Hmm.
There's a one of my cat's purrs is somewhere in the
Oh,
feature film.
nice.
Yeah, I was setting up the mic and he came up into the mic and was purring, and I was like, well, I've got to sample this. How do you get good performances from actors moving into the directing?
So the thing you're going to want to do to get good performances from your actors is give them actionable direction. That sounds really obvious, but what a lot of directors do is they give very vague direction that can be left up to interpretation in the wrong way. So for example, some directors will be like, give me a little bit more of this, spice it up a little bit, give me a little bit more energy. And it's like, well, more energy for them might not be what more energy means for you. One way to get a good performance from your actor would be to say something like, for example, you're filming a dinner scene and you want your performances to be like really tense. One example of actionable direction is to say something like, play this scene as if you were to like drop your fork or something, you get the death sentence. And that's really easy to kind of frame in their mind. And so you give them that kind of framing, and now they're like, okay, now I'm going to act really careful with like how I like eat my meal and stuff. And that's the exact like effect that you're going for. Mateo, should you rehearse scenes before shooting?
I really wish I could. I'll watch all these documentaries, and they're like, yeah, we rehearsed this scene. We were on set. We even had cameras and crew on set, and we rehearsed how this scene was gonna work for a whole week before getting the shot. And it's just like a dinner party scene or something. And I'm like, would that were me? But it's not me. So for the most part, yes. It's not always actionable,
Mm-hmm.
especially at what our demographic is doing.
Should you? Yes. Can you? No.
Yeah, I do think it's very helpful to get a couple cold run throughs before you really get into it, just to get beats down for the scene, so that we're not burning time. You know, like I'll do it when my DP is setting up. So my DP being Zach, I'll be like, "Hey guys, can I get like a little something, a little interaction here?" While he's still in cinematographer mode, and I'll kind of get a rough understanding of how the scene's going to go, and then from there, during the shoots, actual like takes, we'll be refining that. I think that's
Hmm.
very helpful. You can't always do that. Sometimes you're in a spot where it's like we can only hang out the sunroof of this Dodge Durango for so long before somebody calls the cops,
Mm-hmm.
and we've just got to go, 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 go. But if possible, at least get a quick dry rehearsal before you jump into it. Otherwise, you're wasting takes for the most part. That said, we're in the days of digital, so the worst thing you're burning is battery, not like,
A gig and a tiny bit of battery.
yeah, it's fine. How much should you stick to the script? And as you know, I'm the writer, so I'm like, you should 100% stick to the script.
It
But
depends on how much you want to spite your writer collaborator. If you really want to piss them off, just throw it out the window. No, but I would say, coming at this from the perspective of more of a director, cinematographer, and less of a writer, I'm not as tied to the script as Mateo might be, for example. So as long as I am getting the point of the scene across, as long as the scene is serving the purpose that it needs to serve within the context of the greater script, I'm fine. The specifics of how the script plays out, that can be changed and adapted. And a lot of the times we do that on set. So we'll improvise some scenes, we'll kind of change up the writing a little bit in the moment. That's something I'm totally fine with doing as long as the scene is serving its greater purpose. So I would say stick to the script always when it comes to placing the point of it within the story. But everything past that, feel free to adapt and pivot on as you see fit. Mateo, how do you give constructive feedback on set?
I do tend to do the compliment sandwich, where I'm like, hey, I really love what you're doing with this XYZ, etc., etc. Can we, if it's an actor just going completely like off script, or in a direction that we don't want, can we try it this way instead? Often I'll be like, okay, so your character is doing this or that, your character, this is their emotional journey through the scene. I like how you're doing this. Can we move that this way? Can you give me a smidge more over here? Um, we're not paying these actors, so you can't go, hey, give me this.
Hey, that sucked, bro.
Why aren't your lines memorized? We're not Stanley Kubrick. We don't have that cachet, nor do we have the budget to just say, like, what am I paying you for? These people are coming to creatively collaborate with you as actors on a project they're passionate about. So you have to be extra respectful. You should always be respectful of your actors, but you don't even have like I know it's like high stakes for you because this is your project, but you really need to take their feelings into account
Hmm.
and work on a constructive collaboration. What's your approach to visual storytelling?
I don't know if my approach is different from the normal approach to visual storytelling. Like, visual storytelling is just showing the story instead of like telling people about the story. And it's not always bad. Like, I don't always prescribe to the show don't tell mindset. Sometimes, like, having dialogue that explains something is totally natural and totally necessary, especially if you're making like a drama. But my approach to visual storytelling is literally just like what needs to happen in this shot for it to convey what it needs to convey given what's outlined in the script. So it's like maybe it's really important that this guy reaches for the ketchup bottle instead of his coffee creamer and puts it in his, I don't know. Like, you just show what you need to show in order to get the point across. I don't really have like a specific answer to that. Mateo, how do you handle creative disagreements?
Um,
Cry, yell.
cry, roll around on the floor. For me, it's always tough because it's a project we both care about.
Hmm.
It's not like I'm like, oh, well, it's gonna suck this way. Um, so generally, what I've done is whenever we're taking a creative angle that I perhaps don't agree with, I go like, walk me through how does this further the message, the point, the theme, the plot of the movie? And I'll be like, this is what the script says, because I'm always having to defend my script. Um, and I'm like, so like in the scene, the way you're directing this, that doesn't make sense with like the film, the general theme. It's written this way for like to like make this go this way. Um, but also like often with creative disagreements, you have to understand that you're the writer, this other person's the director. You can only like stand your ground for so long. Um, Sometimes you just have to like let it go. And I think that's equally important as like, oh yeah, let me walk them through, like get a mutual understanding of the direction and like what are we trying to say with this other creative direction that we don't agree with compared to the one that I prefer. Just like understand that sometimes you do have to give up on little bits. Pick your battles. Should directors act in their own film?
Yes, absolutely. As a Hitchcock fan and as a former M. Night Shyamalan fan, I would say, yeah, it's kind of a fun little cameo thing. I used to do it a lot because I thought it was like a cool cameo, like, oh, that guy directed the film. And I stopped doing it because it was like, it felt kind of self-serving and I wasn't as good of an actor as the other people that were in the film. So I was like, why am I doing this? Why? Like, I'm just taking away from the project. So if you're confident in your acting, because some directors are like actor directors, they're really good at both. Like, they approach directing from an acting perspective. Some directors are more visual directors, like your Kubrick types, or I would consider myself more of a visual director, where I'm focused more on how things look and conveying the story that way. Depending on what kind of director you are, if you're really comfortable with acting, do it. What's stopping you? And also, as like a YouTuber, but also as a person who's a fan of a lot of like YouTube filmmakers, they're self-filming a lot of things. So like, honestly, shooting a film by yourself with yourself is the best way to do it on a budget. I'm just saying. Mateo, what's the trick to blocking a scene well?
Rehearsing. It's I've talked about how like there's a rehearsal before a camera even gets rolled, and there's rehearsal when the camera's rolling. Um, if you can get the camera there so everything is framed right, and just do a couple cold runs, where you're like whenever we were shooting in the woods for a scene that involved lots of guns and fog and lights and everything happening at once, the rehearsal was extremely important to getting everything blocked, and it worked for me. Um, we like it looked great because we got, it was a lot of moving parts all at once, and if
Hmm.
we hadn't rehearsed, we would have just wasted a good 30 minutes of just getting everything right
Hmm.
with the blocking. That is the biggest trick, because you can do so much with blocking. It doesn't matter. Just rehearse it. How do you balance style and substance?
So I feel about style and substance the same way I kind of feel about like plot and character. So you might disagree, but I think that style serves the substance, if you will. So having something that's purely stylistic because you're a pretentious little mother freaker, you suck and I hate you. But if you can have, for example, I watched a really great movie by Joel Haver last night. It was called Hiccups. The style of that film was really cool because the characters would do these little asides where they would talk to the audience and do these little monologues about what was happening. And sometimes it'd be cool because they would frame the person doing the monologue in within the same scene as like the scene that they're commenting on. So there'd be two of the character, and that served both a stylistic purpose and it was there and it improved the substance and the plot of the film. As long as you can do both, you're fine. But if you just do something because oh, it's cool and artsy, like come on, don't be that guy.
I'm going to be that guy, Zach.
But here's the thing. So like with Hypnagogia, for example, there was a couple scenarios where I was like, oh, Mateo, this is just style over substance. But I was wrong. So for example, the scene where you're like laying in bed, we're like, oh, let's do the spotlight. But does the spotlight make sense? It didn't feel like it made sense, but it actually does because this character just came back from a date and he's kind of a loner and now he feels known and he feels kind of exposed. And the spotlight conveys this feeling of, oh, someone else knows me intimately on some level, and that's really comforting but also terrifying because I feel kind of exposed and almost naked. That scene felt style over substance in the moment, but it wasn't. So you can have style. I think it's worth trying to justify the style sometimes and to make it work so that it serves the substance. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Mateo, what's the best way to communicate your vision?
That's such a hard one. For you and I, Zach, it's often been sitting you down and making you watch a movie with me and going like, see where he does that little like stylistic quirk. I need this. Like, this is where I'm pulling my vision for. We did that with Pi by Darren Aronofsky.
Yeah, yeah.
When I failed to do that with Terrence Malick's The Thin Red Line, because that movie's like 3.5 hours long, we did not capture that same vision. So that's been my like, watch this movie. Here's your homework, and I'll just like watch like these 3 films. Obviously not actionable all the time. I found slideshows have really worked for me.
Hmm.
Put together a PowerPoint, and that's just because I'm a filthy corporate writer and I've started to think in wrong directions. But just putting together a PowerPoint of like, here's sort of the way I want this to go has actually been pretty helpful. How do you know when to cut a shot?
I'm a big fan of not overstaying your welcome in any given scene. So leaving right before the scene gets boring. So trying to find that balance between I need to convey the purpose of the scene so that the scene is justified in being there, and then not like having it play out too long. So sometimes that means like not finishing a conversation, but getting across the points in the conversation that were relevant to moving the plot forward. Not completing an action. So for example, there's a date scene, not showing them walking home after the date if that's not important. Just show the highlights, highlights, get the point across, and then get out. And you can apply that to every individual shot as well. If just, hey, it doesn't need to be that long, get the point across, move on. Mateo, what's the best free editing software?
Resolve. I don't use a ton of free editing softwares, but it's Blackmagic Design. They know what they're doing. Resolve works great. I can do basically everything I need to do at my level of filmmaking in Resolve. Final Cut one day, but that's not free, so.
It is for 90 days.
True, very true. Zach, how do you fix bad footage in post? This has been an internal problem.
Film it in a way to where it's not bad in the first place.
Yeah, well.
That is the correct answer. Other than that, like, I don't know. I don't think you really can fix bad footage. Like, if you overexpose it, tough luck. I mean, if those highlights are clipped, you're done. There's not much you can do.
Use a different take.
Find a way to cope. What is the secret to good pacing?
rewatching the clip over and over and over again. Um, I find like often, and this is just a an issue with the fact that I go to movie theaters and then have to use the restroom afterwards. Um, Often I'll be checking my watch, like, hey, I had a lot of water. I need to make sure that, like, like how much longer do I have in this movie? Like, try to calculate run times. If I'm in a film and I have to go to the bathroom, but I'm not checking my watch, despite how long the film may be, that is the mark of good pacing for me. Um, but it should feel almost breathless, where everything flows from the next scene to the next. Give it room to breathe in places, but never so much room to breathe that people are like distracted. This is different than attention span editing, because I hate attention span editing, even though it works wonderfully on making content. This is like make sure that everything seems to flow very well. There's a way to write for that, but we'll go into that later. Should you edit your own film or hire somebody?
I would say generally edit it yourself, but like if you have a friend who just loves editing and can do it better than you can, and they want to edit your film, like for example, like I have you as a collaborator, you're a writer, so you write the stuff. Let's say there was a third pillar to this collaboration, and Billy over here loves editing. Well, then, like, yeah, he should edit our films for us because he loves that, and that's like his role in this collaboration triangle, this collaboration thruple that doesn't exist yet. I would say in that case, like let someone else do it or pay them a little bit to do it. But generally, I would say if your film has a budget that's less than $50,000 and that's being generous, edit it yourself. I mean, for real, come on. Editing is like most of filmmaking.
It's your creative vision here at its sort of the final stop before you get to put it out into the world, after
Yeah.
all.
And to add to that, like this hurts because I'm a big fan of cinematography, but editing is that is the most filmmaking thing to do. Like that's what filmmaking is. It's sequencing those shots, it's putting them together. Just ask Kubrick. Go argue with him. Mateo, how do you make transitions feel natural?
I don't. I love the smash cut. I love the sort of stylized transition that like brings the audience attention to it.
Hmm.
Now, within like shot to shot transitions, it needs to match the pacing. It needs to match the flow, the beat, the rhythm. But if we're going scene to scene, I love the Star Wars wipes, the crazy dial wipes and everything they do. I love the Godfather where um the Don's mustache like they have like a crossfade and it fades into the one tree in the Sicilian landscape. I love all that crazy stuff, and why why try to hide the stylization? And of course, Zach is like trying to reach through the screen and strangle me right now, so I'll stop. But I don't is the answer. What's the best way to learn color grading?
Just watch YouTube videos about it. And a lot of people are obsessed with color grading. I know it's important, but they're over obsessed with it. They think filmmaking's more about having a pretty color to your shot. And it's really not all about that. It's mostly about editing.
Instagram screen caps disease.
I would say just watch a bunch of YouTube videos and try to dial it back because people are going to want to do crazy color grades where like the shadows are green and it looks like the Matrix, but your film doesn't need to look like the Matrix. Just make your skin tones look natural. If you want to adjust anything else, as long as your skin tones look natural, everything else can be whatever you want it to be, but just be restrained. Be conservative with it. Doesn't need to be crazy. Mateo, how do you save a scene that's not working?
In writing it's so much easier because I can just I've got to rework it or I've got to add dialogue. And editing, it's all been done, unless you want to go into reshoots, which nobody does. I've often found that cutting the scene about halfway through really saves it. Get rid of everything that isn't the point. Like, get the central point of the scene. And if the scene doesn't have a central point, you can either David Lynch it, where you just have it in there for whimsy, which is great. I love putting things in for whimsy. If not that, then just cut it. But paring it down to the bare bones, to the point of the scene, and then onwards is really my best way to do that. How do you make your film feel cohesive?
I often fail at making our films feel cohesive, but usually I fail because I'm trying too many different things visually. So there's too many like tripod shots versus handheld shots. Like I'm not picking one creative decision that kind of is consistent throughout the project. So I would just say like as far as camera movement goes, try to have a similar approach for the majority of the film. As far as the color grading goes, make sure it all looks consistent. Like every shot is very similar. As far as like the audio of your film and the music choices, make sure that you don't have like opera music one moment and like grunge music the next second.
Unless that's a stylistic decision.
Mateo, what's one editing trick every filmmaker should know?
Honestly, and this might come because I love to edit to music to a beat, and your average like CapCut TikTok editor already has this down. But getting it to like cut on the rhythm of the scene is extremely important, more than anything else for me. Just either if you've got a soundtrack, like cut it with the needle drop. If you don't have a soundtrack, cut it with the general flow of the scene. What's the best budgeting lighting kit?
I would say just get yourself a couple panel lights. There's a lot of really great kits, like on Amazon, for example, where you can get like two 1x1 light panels that come with soft boxes and come with two tripod stand. Or what am I saying? That come with two light stands, and they all pack up into one really lightweight case. I would say that would be the first thing I would reach for. And then if you want to kind of build out your lighting kit further, I would get some really small, like credit card sized lights and use those as catch lights for like people's eyes, where you can kind of see like the little highlight that just makes people not look dead. And they can be really great for like hiding in different locations, sticking to metal things like, you know, that shelf back there. So you don't need a light stand all the time. You can be really, really scrappy with it. You can use them as fill lights. So a couple panel lights with soft boxes, a couple credit card size lights, and yeah, you should be off to the races. Mateo, how important is having a good monitor? And I'll let you answer this from like a camera monitor perspective or a computer monitor perspective, whatever you want.
I would say it's pretty important. This might also come because I have a job that is just staring at a computer screen, so my eyes are in the process of being shot to death. Um, just being able to really see everything in the frame, even from a continuity standpoint, that's very important. Computer monitor, that's more in the color grading and having like the, an accurate color, so your color grade doesn't come off as really weird. That's also important, but I would say the camera monitor would be what I would focus on. Do you really need a gimbal?
No, you do not need a gimbal. In fact, I would say having a gimbal might actually hurt you if you're starting out as a filmmaker. It's kind of one of those scenarios where, you know, if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. If you have a gimbal, every shot needs to be a oneer. Every shot needs to have a bunch of motion. And especially when you're starting out, I would say it's better to like kind of rein some of that in and focus on like simpler compositions from a tripod. I would say that's better. But if you want to graduate and there are specific types of shots that you want to get, gimbal can be useful for that. But of course, you don't need it. I mean, with most of this stuff, you don't need it. As long as you have a device that can click record, and it's not pitch black filming in a pitch black room with no lights, no ambient light. That's all you really need to make a movie. Mateo, what's the most underrated piece of gear?
I've already said C-stands earlier, so the Apple box.
Underrated. Interesting.
Yeah, there's so many times where I'm trying to put something up somewhere. I'm trying to adjust like height on, it's not even normally on the cast because the cast tends to be a pretty uniform height, but it's just always nice to have an Apple box that I can stand on. I can stand over Zach's shoulder instead of having to go up on tiptoes with the strobe light to simulate gunfire. It's so much easier. How do you travel with your equipment?
Buy a hatchback and travel with that. I don't know. How do you travel with your equipment?
You had a nifty little bag.
Most modern filmmaking equipment is pretty lightweight, so traveling with it's pretty easy. I would say if I was like taking a lot of trips like via airplane, finding light stands that are like 6 inches long that can really fold down that small would be important, and just trying to get as many things into one bag as possible. Like I said, luckily most equipment's really small and lightweight, so just have at least one light or two, some credit card lights, tiny tripods, and and tiny light stands, and some Rode Wireless Pros. Like that's all really small. That's all you need to make a movie. So, or any video for that matter. Buy a box truck. I don't know. Get a Ford Transit.
There we go.
Mateo, what is your go-to lens for run and gun filmmaking?
The 2.5 on an iPhone.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, I like the feel of it.
Is that
It's
what the
much-
telephoto lens is?
It's the like, you have the all the way zoomed out, and then you have all the way zoomed in. It's the all the way zoomed in one.
Yeah, so the telephoto one.
Yes, the
Interesting.
telephoto
So
lens.
the iPhone 15 was a 3x, and that was very usable because that was like a 75 millimeter focal length. The iPhone 16 Pro is a 5x telephoto.
Oh
It's
wow.
120 millimeter focal length, which is really zoomed in. It's almost too tight. It's kind of annoying. But for you, the telephoto.
Otherwise a nifty 50, but I don't really use the
Yeah.
proper lenses that much.
Honestly, the 2.5 might be pretty close to the Nifty 50.
Yeah, I mean it works for me. How do you keep batteries lasting all day?
Hmm.
Turn off your camera.
Have them on rotation. So set up your charging station somewhere on your set and always have one that's charging. So you're cycling through them throughout the day. That's what I would do. Or just buy an iPhone 16 Pro and the battery lasts all day somehow, even when you're filming. And so you don't have to worry about batteries or storage. It's honestly really beautiful. What is the best external hard drive for editing?
I have a Samsung SSD. Should you shoot in 4K or 1080p?
If you can shoot in 4K, shoot in 4K. 4K is great. Higher resolution, looks nice. People to this day will say, "Oh, you don't need 4K because most people don't have 4K monitors." Yes, they do. Like, come on, it's 2025. They don't sell 1080p TVs anymore. They're all 4K. Your phone is like really high resolution. Most computer monitors are going to be like at least 1440p. Like most stuff is going to look better in 4K if you shoot it in 4K, and most people will appreciate it. If you're really conscious about how much storage space you're using up, you could make a case for 1080p if you're shooting like Instagram Reels or something. I don't know. But generally speaking, 4K is not that much bigger in terms of data rates, but ProRes 4K can be a lot. So you might be able to make a case for 1080p if you're like, oh, I'm going to shoot a documentary for like 5 months and I'm going to have terabytes and terabytes and terabytes of data. Maybe we can get away with just 1080p. But generally, for 99.9% of projects, you should shoot in 4K. Mateo, how do you avoid overheating your camera?
Turn it off.
Well, if it overheats, it's just going to turn off on its
Yeah,
own.
it'll turn, but like keeping it off so the battery's not just running, and battery usage creates heat.
Hmm.
That has been the best way. Also, don't keep it in a hot car. That has always been one of my go-tos. If you can keep it off black asphalt as well, you'll probably be doing better. So, moving in away from gear and tech and now to festivals and distribution. Zach, how do you pick the right festivals?
Most film festivals, from what I've seen, are aiming to collect a bunch of films that are similar in style and in genre. And so, I would say it's a good idea if you made a sci-fi film to submit to sci-fi film festivals. If you made a horror film, submit to horror film festivals. Apply to genre-specific film festivals and any local ones that are more generic. More broad film festivals that show everything. If they're local, like totally apply to that in a heartbeat. But that's what I would look for. Mateo, what's the best way to get your film noticed?
It's so hard, especially in the modern day where you can't just, you know, drop a film on YouTube and because it says short film in the title, it'll come up right with the rankings of everything else. Now everything's algorithmically controlled. I would say having major film with true passion is one of the best things you can do, where people will see the trailer or see it and recommend it to friends because they can just really tell that you put all your artistic excellence into it. Should you self distribute or go through a platform?
I mean, you already know what I'm going to say about this. I think you should self distribute your film as often as possible. We've talked about this before, but distribution has largely been democratized because YouTube exists. And, before that, we
Vimeo.
had Vimeo. Yeah, exactly. Social media. Like, there are tons of outlets available to you to get eyeballs on your project. And, the alternative is what? Like, posting your film on someone else's YouTube channel? Like, or putting it on like a short film exclusive streaming site. Like, a lot of that's not as attractive to me. If it is to you, then like totally look into it. But unless you're doing like a large-ish budget feature film, I would say don't even bother with like formal distribution. I don't know, just some broad thoughts there. Pick a fight with me in the comments. Mateo, how do you write a good festival submission cover letter?
I've never had to do this. I don't think I don't. Surely there are festivals that require them. Um, but like we've submitted to like Oscar entrant film festivals, and they haven't made us do that.
Yeah,
Um,
and usually I'm the one submitting anyway.
yeah, yeah. But I mean, I write the cover. I write marketing materials when needed.
Hmm.
I don't know if that's applicable for people of our caliber.
So how would you write good like marketing materials for it? Like for example, like how do you write a good log line to get people to even be interested in reviewing the project in the first place?
I read this in a newspaper a while ago, but it was taking down a the movie Epic. If you
Hmm.
remember that, the
Yeah.
animated film, I think it was
DreamWorks?
Blue Sky.
Oh,
Maybe it was
maybe.
DreamWorks. Anyway, the movie Epic. Um and they were taking it down because they're like, if you look at the log line, it's as long as your arm and it doesn't like tell you anything.
Hmm.
The movie Up has a log line that's basically like an old man grieving his wife, ties balloons to his house and has an adventure. Like it's very like because of this, because of this, because of this, you know what you're getting. A very like elevator pitch clarity. You want to see more of this.
Hmm.
Um, the log line is hard. I hate pitching like that. I've done enough of it that I'm just like, just please, just let me talk about like my characters. Let me go in depth. It's so annoying to have to boil it down. But if you can't boil it down, your script is meandering too much. Your
Right.
movie's meandering too much. So Hypnagogia is about an obsessed guy who is chasing a dream of a woman um, into dark places. And like that's all you need to know. What's the trick to making a great trailer?
The trick to making a great trailer is try to highlight the most interesting moments from Act 1 and don't really go beyond that. And then maybe in the climax of the trailer, put in a little sneak peek into Act 2 or some big battle or whatever, but like don't play it out very long.
Christopher Nolan always, I don't think he ever showed past the middle of the second act.
I think that's a great rule of thumb. How important is your film's poster?
The poster's pretty important, but at the same time, your poster is kind of your thumbnail for your YouTube video whenever you post it.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too.
It's like I don't even know people who like look at posters in movie theaters and go like, "Ooh, I wonder what that's about." Like they'll see
I
it,
do
but
that.
like I mean, I do that, but like I really don't like that's not a thing anymore. Um the poster like everybody I know they've been looking at posters, they're like, "Oh yeah, I saw the trailer for that on YouTube."
Hmm.
And the YouTube thumbnail is such a terrible way to like format a poster because it's a completely different piece of media.
Yeah.
Um, I do think a good poster can really upgrade your production design. I've seen some really phenomenal posters on like streaming services specifically where you can actually have like a poster size thumbnail and
Hmm.
click on it. And I'm like, man, I really like that poster. Like that really works for it. It makes me want to watch this movie. Should you aim for big festivals or smaller ones? We've kind of answered this.
Yeah, I mean, I would say smaller ones, but it depends. Like if you made a bigger film and you put a lot of money into it and you put a lot of effort into it, like, aim for the stars. I don't want to say I've struggled with self-doubt necessarily, but like maybe I kind of I think a lot of our projects are maybe better than I give them credit for sometimes. So for example, like Choose a Wagon, which is one of our like better little micro shorts, we just sat on that for a few years because I didn't think it was worthy of a film festival for whatever reason. And then I just decided one day to submit it to some festivals and it won. It won some awards. Like I was just sitting on this project and I could have submitted it and I didn't. So here's my point. I think smaller festivals are great because they're more affordable and you're more likely to get into them. But this really just depends on how far into your filmmaking journey are you. Are you making bigger projects or are you making smaller projects?
Have you
Do
made a
you
feature
think,
yet?
yeah, have you made a feature yet? Are the big festivals more expensive and do you have the budget for them? If you do, then yeah, try it. Don't sell yourself short, but also like do some self analysis and try and just gauge where you're at and what festival is going to match your project the most. But from personal experience, I've definitely slept on some of our own projects, and So that can be tricky. But yeah, smaller ones. I love the smaller ones. I think this podcast is largely late. I think this podcast is largely aimed at like the up and coming filmmaker, the people who are getting out and making their first projects, period. So I would say to them, smaller ones, but it depends on who you are. I can't speak for
Yeah.
everyone.
I mean, we didn't submit Choose a Wagon, but we did for the longest time. But when we did submit it, we submitted it next to a project that we thought was better, and
Hmm.
Choose a Wagon just killed.
It did. It did almost better than our recent one.
Yeah, and then our recent one, it was like whatever. Like people liked it, they really enjoyed it, but like they laughed at Choose a Wagon. I was like they were like, man, I really like that one. I'm like, oh, the one from like 5 years before we did this. Well, not 5 years,
And then we
like
had a
3
mini
years.
crisis about stagnation.
Yeah, yeah. Then we had a mini crisis about stagnation.
So, Mateo, how do you deal with rejection?
I always make the actual process the point. So, for example, put out Hypnagogia, and as like I was like, I know Zach's going to do a good job, but I still have doubts about the script, despite the fact that Hypnagogia, like, it's done, like the film is finished. It's in the edit right now, and when I was watching the first cut, I went into it with, hey, if I just bomb this, if my acting performance is bad, which I'll be quiet about that, but it is what it is. I'm just going to go into it knowing that I have made a feature film, and that's something I hadn't done a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
And then I really liked Hypnagogia. I was not disappointed in the least. I was in fact impressed. It came together very well. But like if people just hate on it, I'm like, well, yeah, but I made a feature film. If you don't like it, if you reject it from your film festival, like, c'est la vie. But I made a feature film. Like that's great. That's the
Mm-hmm.
point to me. It's not so much like getting the approval. Obviously, when I submit scripts that I'm trying to really get noticed and like really push into more of the industry side of things, I do feel a pang of like, you know, I really like this script and it got shot down.
Hmm.
But I wrote a feature script. I wrote one more than I had before. What's a realistic budget for festival submissions?
I mean, I don't know. If you're made of money, $1,000, $10,000. I mean, it just depends. I would
Say
say,
5 festivals.
yeah, if it's a short film, it's going to be like maybe $20 to $30 per submission. So, depending on, you can do 5, 6, 7 submissions, $200, I think is a pretty reasonable budget. Like if you just want to submit to some local film festivals, some smaller film festivals, and get like your, you know, new short film seen by some people. It's a really rewarding experience to see your movie in theaters with an audience live. It's really fun and worthwhile. But I don't know, a realistic budget for when you're starting out, maybe a few $100s. Mateo, how do you build hype around your film?
As like an indie filmmaker, I hate to be the big thing's coming, guys, because like there's always that guy that's like, if you know, big thing's coming. Um,
You
I
have to do that though.
I know it's just people hate to be like, yeah, like watch this space, but putting like Instagram stories behind the scenes, people see you working on something that looks interesting, that will build hype. Uh, you have a network, and often Instagram, beyond being kind of a dating app, is
Damn,
like
that's tough.
very, very important for like getting a social network out there that isn't LinkedIn.
Hmm.
Because very few people of LinkedIn are going to go watch your movie. I don't know. Maybe you should post to LinkedIn. I don't know. Um, but like posting to your social networks. Hey, look, I'm doing things before the thing comes out. Then going, hey, I have a trailer out now. Doesn't this look good? And building off of that is, I think, the best way to build hype without doing paid ads. Or, here we're talking about it on our YouTube channel. We're just talking, hey, like, we're making this film. Look at this film. Look at this. Here's some behind the scenes, onwards and upwards. Um, and it's like, that's the way to do it now, unless you happen to have like a marketing agent.
Hmm.
Gone are the days of the Facebook page for your film. I just
Well, the
don't think that's
website
applicable.
stuff is still
Yeah, the
alive and well.
website
Making
is
a
still
website for
alive
your
and well.
films is still worthwhile.
But there used to be like, here's my indie film. I've got a Facebook page for it.
That's kind of cringe. I'm not gonna lie.
Remember
Sorry.
that? Remember those days?
Yeah.
Here's our Kickstarter.
Yeah, and then Kickstarter. Man, I was ranting to myself about this earlier today. I think Kickstarter is annoying. Because it used to be this is perfect. I was thinking about Kickstarter. I have the same qualms with Kickstarter as I have with film festivals, where it used to be like, hey, this is, films that have big budgets are going to get distributed no matter what. So film festivals are a way to get distributed if you don't have a big budget and you're making small films. And now the most worthwhile festivals are for big films that are going to get theatrical releases anyway. So it's like, well, what's the point of it even being there? With Kickstarter, it used to be like, oh, I'm an entrepreneur and I have like this product that I want to get off the ground, but I don't have the capital to actually be able to like get supply to start and cover my development costs and stuff like that. So Kickstarter and crowdfunding was a great solution to that. Well, now these companies that were distributing their products just fine before are launching Kickstarters for no reason. For no reason. Why are you
That's a
doing
clip.
that?
That's clippable.
Yeah, thanks. But it's annoying. It's like Kickstarter kind of lost the whole point of it in a lot of these bigger festivals, like the Sundances of the world. It's like, well, why does this exist? I could go to the theaters and watch these big budget movies anyway.
South by Southwest, same
thing. Well, South by Southwest has other,
Yeah,
things that
yeah.
make it worth going to. But like, as far as the film festival side, yeah, it's annoying. We had to break up this episode somehow.
How do you balance filmmaking and a day job?
Ooh, finding balance in life can be tough. I'm a big believer in you have the time to do the things that you actually want to do. I believe that wholeheartedly because it's been true for me. If there's things that I'm making excuses for, like, oh, I don't have time for this and that, it's like, really, if I do some self-reflecting, it's like, yeah, but you played Balatro on your phone for 2 hours while listening to a political podcast that was just people yelling at each other. Did that seem worth your time? And it's like, well, maybe that's some creative avoidance. Like, not that that's of higher quality and worth my time more, but it's like, I had the time. I'm just not being honest about it. So, obviously, if you have a day job, a lot of your day is already taken up. That's fine. But, lean into your weekends and lean into the after work hours. And also you have to make sacrifices and really like gauge like what's occupying your time and what can you move around and what can you sacrifice temporarily. And especially like with filmmaking, it's very project by project based. So it's like, maybe this weekend I don't go see my parents. That's fine because that's like one weekend out of like 52,
Call
so
your mom.
if you don't make it work, probably don't care enough. You should probably click off this podcast, which I won't be that upset about because it's already been an hour and 40 minutes.
Yeah.
Mateo, what's the best way to network in the industry? The industry.
Again, like this is a question that for our demographic is hard because we don't necessarily have an industry. We're not like already film workers in Hollywood. We're doing this in a semi-pro manner at the most. I find when you network with your local film groups, which is what I do, I would go watch movies in a bar with a bunch of cinephiles, and we had a great time. And then we moved away to the bar to just each other's houses when that event ended. But like I've networked with a bunch of people that we're going on like vacations together this summer. Like we're going on like a river rafting trip. And I'm like, I would not have found these people and like forged these relationships if I had stayed home and watched movies by myself, which has been one of my predominant means of consumption of cinema. Is just watching them by myself because then I don't get distracted, etc., etc. I love going to the theater by myself for that reason. But like you do have to note that just because you're networking with movie buffs doesn't mean you're networking with people that are necessarily into making movies. There is a distinction. So I would say find people who like people at your local film society. My art museum has one, and that's where I find a lot of people. And I just, we talk movies. The local art museum does showings that are just for the members, and then you have a discussion afterwards. And there's industry professionals that are there, and you can network with those. And half the time, nothing comes out of it other than a pleasant discussion about film. But I personally love having pleasant discussions
Oh
about
no.
film.
If that's the worst that can happen,
Yeah.
like,
Oh no. Well, I mean, I
still
guess
seems
the worst that could
worthwhile.
happen is you don't enjoy the movie, but
Mm.
that builds character. So.
Man, I built some character last night, let me tell you.
Zach, how do you handle creative burnout?
Distancing myself from whatever creative thing I was working on. There's certain things that really fill me up. There's certain pieces of media that I will return to. So, if I'm burnt out, feeling uninspired, go watch a Kubrick film. That's going to fill you up really fast. At least for me. Go rewatch Space Odyssey. You'll be fine, kiddo. Mateo, should you specialize or wear multiple hats?
As somebody, I could probably be a writer only for the rest of my life, as long as they pay me large amounts of money to do so. Personally, we don't have any choice. You can, I guess, bring on a friend with a specific expertise for each little role of a film, and together, like, you have put together a complete movie. Congratulations. But the reality is that you don't have a choice. You have to wear multiple hats.
Right.
We had to wear like a kind of co-director, cinematographer, producer, writer, actor hat. Depending on who we were, it was, Zach had to do producer, director, cinematographer. It's stunts in some aspect.
That's why, just like a side note, that's why, like, for the credits of our microfilms, I just stopped crediting us.
Yeah.
Because I'm just like, it's a film by me and Mateo. That's it.
Yeah.
That's all you need to know.
It's, there's so much that goes into it. I had to be writer, script super, director sometimes, producer all the time, actor most of the time. And I was struggling with it. There were parts of the film that suffered because I was having to wear too many hats. And I was like, man, I really want to bring somebody on as like a producer role. And Zach was like, I can't do that. I'm already juggling so much. And I was like, well, like, there's only so much I can do. And that was a struggle on the feature. We got through it. I did it. I didn't like it some of the time, but I did it.
Suck it up.
What's the best filmmaking advice you've ever gotten, Zach?
Probably the best piece of filmmaking advice I've gotten is to, I mentioned this literally earlier in this episode, but film on the shadowy side of people's face. It's just such a cheat. It's just like, if you just do that, you're good. Every shot looks way better, has way more depth. Obviously, there's exceptions to that, but yeah, the best piece of filmmaking advice I've gotten is to film on the shadow side. Far side key, that's what it's called. It's really elevates your shots, and it's easy to do too. You just move the camera from here to there. Easy. Mateo, how do you stay confident in your vision?
Be annoying.
Explain.
I have like such a profound vision for everything I do, to the detriment of a lot of our projects because I'm married to it. And I've said, like, you got to let things go sometimes, but really just having that strong vision and not swaying from it. You can compromise, but just don't sway from it, because nobody wants to be the guy who like made a project and at the end of the project, it's a completely different project that he just does not care about. Do insist, have a very strong idea for what the film should be. And even if you don't have to fight with anybody over specifics of your vision, having that strong idea will just make the film a better film in the first place. What's one skill every filmmaker should learn?
So I have the answer I want to give and the answer I have to give. The answer I want to give is cinematography. Just get really good at lighting and shot composition, because that's what I like about filmmaking. But in reality, if you don't know how to edit videos well, you're a trash filmmaker. I'm sorry. You probably are not it doesn't matter how good your script is. It doesn't really matter how good your shots look. If you can't edit well, because editing is more than just assembling the project. It's learning to think in sequences, because that's what filmmaking is. It is montage. It's montage theory, right? If you know anything about that, it's all about the meaning from juxtaposition, from shot to shot to shot. What information are you conveying? When do you cut? All of that. And if you don't understand editing well, I would learn that. I would edit your own projects. I would take classes, take every opportunity to learn editing, because that is fundamentally, that is the cornerstone of filmmaking. That's what it is. So learn editing. It's a little harsh. I think that was too harsh.
No, you're right. You're right.
Mateo, how do you build an audience for your work?
Again, like I do most of this on social media, but it's been talk about your work and your passion for your work, and not like you're like begging for views, but like you are a professional who knows what you're doing and likes what you're doing, and people will be curious, and you will have people that are like, "Hey, when's your next film coming out?" And you're like, "You care about that?"
Hmm.
I have people that just want to read my feature scripts just because I blog about them. And I'm like, yeah, you know, day 58 of plugging away at the same scene because I'm stupid with this. And people are like, oh, wow, yeah. And then, later on, I'll be like, I got a lot of progress done in this one. I'm really happy with how it is. And people are like, ooh, yeah, that's cool. And then push onwards and onwards and onwards until you're like, yeah, I'm happy to announce that I finally finished that project that I've been talking about for 3 years. And people are legitimately curious to see what that project they've been following for 3 years is. Aaron Stewart on, who did Mandy, now he's actually signed on to write the Cyberpunk 2077 sequel, which I'm very excited about. But he does a lot, and obviously he can't talk about everything because when you are an actual professional who has studios and all of that contracting, you can't just reveal your entire project. But he talks about the little projects he has, and as just an audience member, not some sort of producer, not some sort of director, not an industry professional that like has any sway on his life. I'm still curious to see what they're about because he's just very casually basically blogging his life away, on Instagram stories, and he makes interesting art and I want to see more of it. Zach, this is a big one. Should you move to LA or stay where you're at?
I was just looking at that question and I was like, man, there is a lot embedded in that question. It's very, very loaded. Obviously, the answer is it depends. But what it depends on is what are your goals as a filmmaker? If you want to work your way up through a studio, starting as a PA and eventually becoming a cinematographer, maybe a director, like LA might be the place to go still. A lot of our questions throughout this episode that pertain to like how to find collaborators and like how to network and stuff like that, we've kind of approached it in a couple different ways. On one hand, it's like, well, if you want to go the conventional route, like, yeah, find ways to network, go to events, go to film festivals, like meet producers, whatever the case might be. But I think with where my mind's at as a filmmaker in the year of our Lord 2025, where it is so accessible and it's like this art form that everyone can participate in, and there's no gatekeeping, and it's literally a thing that everyone can do. I want to say stay where you are. You can make great films in your hometown, and I would recommend that you do because you're going to have a particular perspective about it. If you're from the Midwest, I think the
As so
Midwest
many of
is,
us are.
I think it's underrepresented in film. Like lean into where you're from. Make a great Oklahoma film. Like what makes a great Oklahoma film?
Make a
Don't
great
try to,
Missouri film.
yeah, make anywhere film. There's unique characteristics to every place on earth, and I think you should just lean into that. Don't try to make it something else. Like when I was growing up making films in my backyard, I tried to make the backyard feel like an epic fantasy backdrop, and it wasn't that. I should have made stories that took place in a backyard if that's what I had access to. And that's the advice I would give to all filmmakers, no matter where you're from. Write a story around your hometown. Like don't try to make it look like LA. Don't try to make it look like Greenland. You don't have to do that. Just lean into it, embrace it. But I think to a very small subset of viewers, go move to LA, I guess. It's cool.
I will
Live out of a
say,
van. Go write scripts every day. Like meet people. Do that. That sounds cool too.
in the here and now, LA is at a very interesting intersection where, as aftermath of the past 5 years of the film landscape, it's kind of becoming post-import Detroit, where everything is being moved overseas or to Oklahoma, like right here. Atlanta has taken such a chunk out of the LA film industry.
Right.
because it is cheaper other places and you have lots of talent other places. But at the same time, I don't think LA is just like collapsing. I don't think
Yeah, yeah. It has a purpose. It serves a purpose.
it's an expensive place to live, but I think there still are advantages to it. Maybe I'll move to LA. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe. It's just a big maybe. It depends. Like half the questions here.
So this next question, I'll level up both of us. This is our final one for the day. Um, what's the one thing you wish you knew when you started?
There's a lot. There's a lot of directions I could take this. I could say small little fundamentals about cinematography would have helped a lot. I could go the more motivational route. How would you answer that? And I'm not trying to avoid the question, but just out of curiosity.
I think I would say, like, when I started doing movies, and you can trace this back to when I was 10 years old making stop motions with Legos. Before that, when I was making little videos with puppets, all of that for me, I would say at around 14, when I started to do short films and that sort of thing, or at least attempt it, is like tell myself, hey, you're still going to be doing this 10 years later. You're still going to really like this. Because I never really wanted to do film the way that some people are like, I want to be a great director. I just wanted to tell stories. And this has been an avenue that I've just been following. As soon as a door opens, I keep going through it.
Mm.
And so I just, like kind of tell myself, hey, you're still going to be doing this. Like, you're still going to enjoy it. Because I think that would have set up a bit more intentionality with my schooling and all of that I just sort of stumbled into, like, oh yeah, I do want a media production minor. I could have gotten on that earlier. But all that to say, hindsight's 2020.
Right.
But I do wish I could have been like, hey, you're going to keep doing this and really enjoy it. Like, it's worth it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of similar to what I was thinking with the, if I were to go to the motivational route, like, I was going to say something like go all in. Don't be resistant because, like you said it so well, like you're going to be doing this for a long time. If I could give advice to my past self, it'd be like, hey, you should go in even harder. Mainly so that I could be set up for success more. Future Zach that's talking to you right now. Do better so I can be better. No,
I think, like, other than maybe going to a film school, like a younger me would have just done basically the same things.
Yeah.
Like I came upon this path has been pretty easy for me. I keep making films until something tells me I can't, and nothing's told me I can't anymore.
Right.
So, unless you count getting rejected from a film festival, but I don't think that really counts as being told you can't.
No, definitely not.
To that end, I hope these have been interesting questions to you. I hope you've been able to glean some sort of advice or maybe a comment that makes you want to kill us, which you can let us know down in the comments. We have a little link you can follow if you have films of your own that you want us to assess, look at, review. It's almost like a film festival, except you don't get rejected.
And it's free. Doesn't cost you
and
anything.
It's completely free. Without further ado, I've been Mateo.
And I've been Zach, and if you've been watching the episode up till now, thank you so much. I'm honestly flattered that you would spend 2 hours with us for the longest episode of your next film to date, which is funny because this was meant to be like an easy episode because we're both out of town next week, so we're batching this on a Saturday, but it ended up being, I feel like, really good. I feel like we covered a lot of ground.
I enjoyed it. We should do maybe a smaller batch of questions, longer on the answers.
Yeah.
I think we should do this again. I've been Mateo.
And I've been Zach.
This has been your next film. Go make a movie.